First file on the calendar for today is House File 3404. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 3404, an act relating to public safety, increasing criminal penalty for impersonating a peace officer, the first engrossment.
I recognize the author from Hennepin, Representative Cleavorn, who will explain the bill.
Thank you very much. This bill is a bill that is born out of the June 14th, 2025 events, but I want everyone to know that I'm not focusing on those events. I'm focusing on how we deal with this crime going forward. The bill itself is pretty simple and pretty clear in what it does. Subdivision 1 of the bill changes the base offense of impersonating an officer with intent to mislead from the current gross misdemeanor to a felony with a 5-year term. Subdivision 2 relates to an aggravated offense, impersonating an officer with the intent to mislead while gaining unauthorized access to building, giving misleading orders, unlawful orders, or driving a vehicle made to resemble a legitimate law enforcement vehicle. It also has a repeat offense provision and takes that from a 2-year felony to a 10-year felony. There are prohibitions on the markings that a car can have, and would a reasonable person assume that the car is, in fact, a law enforcement vehicle. Subdivision 3 creates an aggravated offense for impersonating an officer while in possession of a firearm. This is a new offense and carries a 10-year felony, but the same as the enhancements for the repeat offenses. The bill also creates a sentencing scheme for situations where someone commits a more serious offense while impersonating an officer. This is to ensure that the defendant faces the consequences for impersonating an officer in addition to the more serious underlying crime. The provision is modeled after the crimes committed for the benefit of a gang. Lastly, Subdivision 5 creates the duty to identify for law enforcement, and it establishes that law enforcement officers in Minnesota must identify their last name, the agency that employs them, and their identification number. But I want everyone to rest assured there is protection for those officers who are working undercover. The agency has agreed to absorb the costs for this bill. Members, it's a good bill, and I'll speak more on third reading.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 3404.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Cleavorn. As I said when we passed this bill out of public safety, that this bill is something that I will point back to as years go by, and they say, were you able to work together and to get something done and reach across the aisle? The bill that we have today before us looks, it's a shell of what originally came out, because there was a lot of work and a lot of conversations and a lot of work with the stakeholder groups. I see some of the chiefs are upstairs. I go back to the morning of June 14th, and I, like most of you in this room, were woken up by a knock on the door. I was immediately able to recognize 2 of the people that I used to work with that were knocking on my door. Most of the other people in this room would not have had that benefit. What you should have is a confidence that if you are getting a knock on the door for whatever reason at 2 o'clock in the morning, that you know who they are and that you can trust them. And if you see someone on the side of the road, that you know that you can trust them. Now, over time, we have had several people that I can think of that we just dealt with that would drive around and make their cars look like a law enforcement officer car, or they would buy an old Squad and put equipment back on, and if they think it was, fun, or if you're out in the country and you think that it's it's fun to get behind your buddies and scare them, that's not something that can happen anymore. So is it a serious issue? Yes. Is it a serious punishment? Yes, because it's a serious issue. Because for every person that pulls a prank on their buddies by doing this, excuse me, there's a sexual assault potentially happening or something like that. It is serious. It is not something to be joked with. If you think that this is overdoing it, let me ask you, what else would you do for a prank? Would you pretend to be a doctor for a prank? Is there anything like that? And the answer is no, because it's serious and lives are in danger, and it's important, and we have the penalties to match the importance of that. So with that, Representative Cleavorn, thank you for working with all the stakeholders, taking our concerns into consideration, and I recommend a yes vote.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Bonner.
Thank you. And to the members, I think it's been a rough week for a lot of us. We started with a high of seeing Sophie and Colin and Elena in this chamber as Colin spoke to us about it being an instrument of peace, about dignity and respect. In this week, we saw more information come out about June 14th, about those final moments. And I'm sure, like many of you, we all felt a collective gut punch in thinking about those final moments and our beloved friend and leader. Within the last week, I also went to court for the first time to face the man who came to my door to kill me and my family. The man who didn't have anything to do with being an instrument of peace, nothing about dignity or respect. He didn't see me or my family as human. And he certainly didn't give that honor to the Hoffmans, to Ann Rest, to the Hortmans, not even to the family dog. He didn't care. And I had some people said to me, well, why did you go to court? You don't have to go. Yes, I do. Because I need to be in that room. I need to be the physical embodiment. Because Melissa cannot. I need to be able to look him in the eye so that he knows that what he did was wrong. That he knows that he did not kill me and my family. He failed. He failed to kill the Hoffmans. He failed to kill Ann Rest. He failed to take out anyone else in this room. But most importantly, that if he thinks that he won because he killed Mark and Melissa for even one fraction of a second, he is sadly mistaken. Because each one of us in this room embodies the best of Melissa. We understand the need to do the people's work in this building. We understand that when we sit in these chairs, we don't represent ourselves, we represent the voices of 42,000 other people when we do this work. And we do it to the best of our ability every day. So it's important to be able to do that. But what's really heinous about this specific issue is that he came to my home. He came to our houses, a literal wolf in sheep's clothing, betraying our trust and our sense of safety, shattering our peace by impersonating someone we would trust. And he used that uniform of the incredible people, the men and women in blue, to gain our trust and to gain access to us, to do heinous things. We know darn well that the reason that the Hoffmans opened that door was because they believed that a police officer stood behind it. They believed in the safety and security of that. They know darn well that both Ann and I would have opened that door because we trust our police departments. We believe that they are the good guys, embedded in us from the time we are small, that this is the cavalry coming to save us. That is the particularly heinous nature of what happened on June 14th. That this individual would use that to gain access to Melissa's home, to have her open the door, believing that what lay beyond was something that would bring her peace and safety, not death and destruction. That is the real problem in this. This bill that we have today won't bring Mark and Melissa back. And it won't undo the damage that is forever in our hearts. But what it will do is make it very crystal clear that the men and women who proudly serve us in blue should never, ever be taken advantage of in this way. And that the reason that is so important is that when we speak our voice for 42,000 people in each of our districts today, we're talking about saying that we should be able to know that the people in our communities, when they open that door, that they can feel safe, they can feel secure, they can know that those peace officers are there to protect them. That is why this is so vital. And so I want to urge all of us in this room to use our collective voices today to take one tiny step to restore that safety and security to every single Minnesotan, and perhaps take one small step to heal our own pain. Vote green.
I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Steer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So for 23 years, I've wore a badge, and I've built trust with the community. And on June 14th, that badge that I wear was used against law enforcement. Every single law enforcement officer in Minnesota was grief-stricken by what happened. So MPPOA supports this bill, the Chiefs Association supports this bill, the sheriffs support this bill. Every peace officer in the country would support this bill. It's a very good bill. Vote green.
Further discussion to the bill. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this is a super significant day, and I appreciate the words that were shared by Representative Bonner. But today, members, let's realize the gravity of this moment through the lens of not just what has happened, but the way that we need to lead in our communities, in our families each and every day. When this bill is signed into law, it has significant and important impacts for the future. And also realize that it is our role and our responsibility to ensure that young people understand this gravity, that we are building up the foundations of our society, of our constitutional republic, teaching kids how to participate in government and how to make changes, and also how to be good kids and good citizens and good people. And the reason that I mention that, members, is because plenty of people, plenty of young people in their teenage years and before their brains are fully developed have chosen to make decisions to impersonate law enforcement officers. And when you have a bill that has such significance in terms of the outlook for someone if they were to be convicted of a felony, we need to do our part in the future to ensure that kids know the gravity. And that likely should take place in school, and it should be taught in our homes and taught in our schools about how significant and how inappropriate it is to impersonate a law enforcement officer. And I mean that because there's so much definition here. It's not just dressed as a law enforcement officer. It's having lights on a vehicle. It's having the labels of a law enforcement entity on a vehicle. This is really significant legislation that I am supporting today, but we also need to be looking out for our kids in the future and ensuring that they know, because we all know in this moment, in this room, why this bill is going to pass today. But kids need to understand the gravity of their decisions in their teenage years as they first become drivers, to know what's appropriate, to know what's not, to know what it looks like to be a good citizen, to be a good neighbor, and to care for those around you. So thank you to all of those who've been involved in crafting this legislation. And I know that Minnesota's future is brighter because of it.
Further discussion to the bill? Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you. And as was stated earlier, I owe a debt of gratitude to many people who helped over the last several months to get this legislation in order. So I'm going to begin with that, and then I'll have my closing remarks. I would like to thank Chairs Moeller and Novotny for your complete support in working with me and getting this work done. I'd like to thank Representatives Hewitt, Steer, Whitty, Pete Johnson, and my co-author, Kristen Bonner, for the great amount of time that you put in working on this bill. To you, Chief Potts, in the room, thank you so much for your guidance and information that you've shared with me. I thank the Police Chiefs Association, the sheriffs, the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, and also the 19 suburban cities that stood with me in this work. To our incredible staff, I'm totally ignorant of this law from at the beginning, and you've been my teachers. Thank you to the public safety staff, both DFL and GOP. And I'd like to thank House Nonpartisan Ben Johnson, who has explained more laws to me over the last 6 months than I could have ever imagined. We are incredibly fortunate to have our staff who help us get this work done. And I want to close with quotes from the letters that are on your desks. From the chiefs, Minnesotans expect and deserve absolute confidence when the individual presents themselves visually or verbally as a police officer, that person is a duly licensed Minnesota police officer. Law enforcement officers across Minnesota were especially troubled by the reported use of a police disguise in carrying out these heinous crimes. Such deception not only facilitated violence, but struck at the very heart of the public's trust in legitimate peace officers. Focusing and strengthening penalties and clearly affirming that impersonating a peace officer is a criminal act. This bill serves to protect both the public and the integrity of law enforcement, which was my ultimate goal. And then from the 19 cities, they said these provisions recognized the heightened danger associated with deliberate impersonation, and this bill provides a meaningful deterrent. Members, I'm asking for your green vote, and if possible, I would ask for, as a point of personal privilege, for a moment of silence before we vote.
Members, I would ask that you would rise for a moment of silence. The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 134 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title is agreed to.